Welcome everyone to episode 343 of Fergo and the Freak. I'm your host, the Glorious League Freak, and today I've got a very special guest. He is the owner of Rugby League Monthly, which is a really cool general rugby league website, and he is also the current owner of One-Eyed Eel, which is one of the old school rugby league websites, so it's really cool to talk to him. His name is Elliott Richardson. Thanks for joining the podcast, Elliott.
No worries, mate. Thanks for having me on.
Now, first of all, tell me about Rugby League Monthly, because this is something you've created not too long ago, but it's been growing steadily, and it's a really cool site if you're into getting different opinions and news updates and things like that about the game in general.
Yeah, so I'd been throwing the idea around in my head. So just for a little bit of extra background, I'm a journalist by trade. So I went to uni and did that. And now I've been working in the industry for close to 10 years. But I don't work in the footy industry. I did that for about 6 months or so at a different outlet. And I'm someone who likes the long read. I like sitting down on a Sunday morning and reading, for 10 or 15 minutes, the one article about particularly sport. I love my sport. And I kind of got the idea. I read the Cricket Monthly from ESPN Cricinfo, and I'm also a subscriber to The Athletic. And so they both have great features and great writers there. And I kind of went, where's the rugby league equivalent? Where's the monthly publication of a couple of really good feature articles telling something a bit beyond what the headline is? So the tagline of the site is more than the back page. So I'm not going to be giving you, the transfers, ins and outs of the day-to-day business of rugby league. I'm looking a bit deeper, a little bit further into that. And so at the start of last year, I kind of went, you know what, I'll have a crack and see what I can come up with. And then lockdown kind of happened, and that kind of played into me a little bit because, I couldn't go out. Didn't have much to do at night. So I kind of worked away on that in my spare time. And it steadily grew. And then this year it's kind of, I just kind of kept the momentum going. And then, we're in second lockdown now. And again, that's kind of helped my writing and having some more time to do this, because it does take a fair bit of time. And that's why I only publish once a month, generally.
Now, it's interesting that you bring up long form writing in rugby league, because it's something that in the past I've really enjoyed doing. And I have found that at times the market has not been, it hasn't embraced the long form writing in rugby league like it has in a lot of other sports. And I think even in other sports, like I'm a big NBA fan, and it's a really niche market even for the NBA. And I've joked before that you can do a long form article and put your heart and soul into it, and sometimes you don't get the response you want in terms of feedback from people or traffic. And then you can do the 5 worst haircuts in rugby league, and it can go viral. And it's really disappointing. To have that commitment to the long form writing in the sport, it's something that you've really got to embrace and love, and to make it work, isn't it?
Yeah, I knew that going in. Like I said, I'd worked for like a general sports publication for 6 months over the 2015-16 summer. And I had that, I had more detailed articles that would hardly get a hit, and then I'd put together, a list of the top 10, and that would go nuts for a weekend. So I knew that going in. But for me, it was more, I wanted to do it. It didn't start out as, I'll put a subscription on this, or, I'll turn this into something, that's a bigger production. It was kind of just, well, I like writing about this stuff. I might as well, do it on a website that's my own, where I own the content, rather than trying to be a freelancer and pitching it, because then, as soon as you pitch it to someone and they pick it up, it becomes theirs. It's no longer yours. Your name's on the byline, but they can do whatever they want with it. And I wanted the ownership of that. So I kind of went, you know what, if people want to read it, they can read it. If they don't want to read it, then they don't have to. But for me, it was, I really want to do this. And I got a lot of support as well from my dad, who's a big rugby league fan. He's like me, he's a mad Parramatta supporter. Because it kind of came out of his complaining, to be frank. He was always saying there's not enough detail in these rugby league articles, and There's not a lot of really good rugby league journalism. He never told me to do it, but I kind of went, if he feels that way, there's got to be more people that feel that way.
Yeah.
And so, it was born out of that. I mean, funnily enough, my most read article was in December last year, and I think I said that it was an opinion piece, so it wasn't one of my long features. It was the NRL is a danger to itself.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the day after they announced all the rule changes for this season.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll toot my own horn. I did predict that the six again was going to be an absolute shit fight,
mm-hmm.
As I think a lot of people did. But yeah, so I spent a lot of time doing these long forms, and then my most read article is kind of this opinion piece written in anger after some rule changes.
I'll tell you what, my best stuff is written when I'm angry. and the best feedback I get when there's something like I've written long form articles before, and it can be about something that I'm pretty calm about, but I'm interested in, and you don't get much feedback. But if there's something I'm really angry about, and I write like a shark eats, my eyes are curled back in my head, and it's just I'm smashing the keyboard. And I get good feedback from it. And I think that comes through in an article when you're fired up about something. And I think it's because you kind of get to the point, and because you're passionate about it as well. I think that always comes through.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed that with One Ideal. If you're following Parramatta, you'll get pretty angry. And so, my most commented pieces aren't when we win, it's when we lose. And I can be pretty scathing when I want to be, and I have been, particularly this season, when we went through that form slump not too long ago. A couple of my articles got, mine generally do. I mean, I'm the site owner, so generally, if I write something, it gets read pretty deeply on the site. But I can see the views and I can see the comments, and obviously there's a crossover there. If I'm angry, the rest of the Parramatta fans are angry, and they're looking for an outlet. And if I've written something, generally that's the outlet for them to kind of get fired up over. But also, I also think that I've tried to mix. So this year I did try to improve my writing as well. So I did a short course on basically like creative sports writing. It was by a cricket writer called Jared Kimber. And if you haven't read his stuff, he's unbelievable in the way he can paint a story for you. And I conversed with him briefly a few years ago about that. And he's not actually a journalist. He likes writing. He calls himself a word goblin. But his stuff comes along now. It's emotive, and it helps you put yourself there and imagine what's going on. And I've tried to do that a little bit of that this season. That's where I've got some really good feedback. I did a big feature on Benji Marshall, and there's not a quote in that piece. I didn't interview anyone for it. I wrote it as a tribute to him, because it could be quite honestly his last season this season, and what's kind of his impact on rugby league since his debut. What's his legacy going to be, and how do we kind of feel about that? Because I grew up in the 2000s, so Benji for me was childhood. And even though I wasn't a Tigers supporter, it was kind of like it was that wild ride of watching a player with his talent, his skill. And, as a kid, you grow up, you watch a player like that and you go, I want to be like that. And so, you're in the schoolyard, you're trying to Benji step and a Benji flick pass. And then even as I got older and I was playing footy, whether it was Oz tag or tackle footy, if someone flicked a flick pass behind their back, it was called a Benji. It wasn't a flick pass, it was Benji's flick pass. Yeah. And that's what I tried to capture there in that article, and that's where I got a lot of really good feedback too.
And do you find that you've over time have tested yourself with different styles of writing as well? Because you can do analytical writing, but then you can do things that it's more about your feelings or how, like you say, how Benji Marshall makes you feel as a fan, even though you're not a Tigers fan. Have you actively, as you've been writing over the years, tested yourself with different styles?
100%. One of the best bits of advice that I got given by a senior editor was to constantly push yourself. And the Benji article was that. It was the first time I had really, truly kind of tried to come at a topic from a more emotional point of view, because I'm very analytical in my thinking. I'm very, very logical in my thinking, and I know that comes across in my writing. And so for me to try and, there's very few stats in it, and if they are, it's to add to the story. It's not about the stats. Like I said, there's no quotes, there's no real analysis. It's just, how does it make you feel? And I actually based it on a piece by Jared Kimber he'd written about Greg Norman, and the way that, Greg Norman changed golf in Australia and made, all these, these 30, 40, 50-year-old men want to be young again, but also play golf like the Shark. And that's kind of what I took, from being 40, 50-year-old men wanting to play golf like Greg Norman to, the kids and the teenagers and the men in their 20s wanting to play footy like Benji. And that was hard for me to write because I didn't write like that. I'm not a good fiction writer. I'm not a very good creative storyteller, but that's what I'm trying to work on.
And it's interesting because you can, when you analyze a player and you can get into stats, and obviously I do a podcast with somebody that uses stats quite a lot. But for some players, it's cool that you basically sat down and wrote the article of Benji Marshall. You had to see him,
Exactly.
Because the stats don't do it justice sometimes. I think that Cameron Smith is an interesting player in that regard, in that you can sit down and go through and make a really good case for him on the stats side of it. But you had to see what he did on the field, and you had to see the influence he had and the way he won at every single level and how reliable he was. Because, and Andrew has brought this up before, that in 20 years' time, we're not going to be looking at highlights of Cameron Smith. And that's going to be really interesting to see how history judges him because of that. And I think he'll be fine because the statistics are so overwhelming. But at the same time, I also hope there are people like you that are sitting down and writing articles and saying, the stats are amazing, they're out of this world, but you had to see him play to realize that the stats did not matter. It wasn't about the stats. It was about what he was as a player, and just that momentum that he had of greatness every single game he played.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually got a Cameron Smith one kind of penciled in somewhere along the line for next year.
Mm-hmm.
And what you just said there, yeah, you're right. No one's really going to be looking up highlights of Cameron Smith's career. And I kind of equate him with, in terms of his longevity and pursuit of excellence, a bit with Tom Brady. And particularly in the back end of Tom Brady's career, like we are now, he's not throwing the 50-yard bomb down midfield to hit an open wide receiver.
Yeah.
He's doing the 10-yard check down, and that's not a highlight, right? He's not pulling off the big note plays, but it's his level of perfection that he's been at for a decade, and it was the same with Cameron Smith. And it's going to be up to writers like myself and other writers to be able to paint that picture in 10, 15 years when people are around who didn't watch Cameron play, and being able to tell them that he had the most influence on the field I've ever seen of a player in terms of how he could change the momentum, how he could organize a team, how he pulled apart a defense, and in all honesty, how he influenced referees. As much as it's become a meme, like, he was the 400 games he was a referee. The way he approached referees and dealt with them, I think it might have been Gavin Badger or one of the retired refs, or might have been Luke Phillips, said Cameron was the hardest to kind of not work with, but to referee, because he was always polite, but he knew when to get into your ear, and he knew what to say and when to say it. And he said that, that becomes harder for a referee. It's easy to send a yelling, screaming captain away. It's hard when they approach you very professionally and treat you as an equal, and either make a compelling argument, or, he said, approach them in such a way that they can't send him away. There's the classic Melbourne's on the ropes, Cameron's going to go chat to the referee about something in the ruck, and it was a pointless exercise, but it bought Melbourne an extra 30, 40 seconds to rest, set the defensive line, and then, the referee isn't going to send him away at that point. And if you think about it, they brought in that rule about you can only approach the ref at a stoppage at this part of the game. They really brought that in because of Smith and other captains like him, because they knew how to slow a game down. And very few players they end up changing the rules for or adapt the rules for. And I think that's what Cameron's going to be remembered for, is his ability to run that Melbourne side and being such a linchpin, not in just them, but Queensland and Australia as well. He went up a level and he went up, 3 gears that he could play at.
Yeah, exactly. And like, he was always, it didn't matter what level and what team, he was the linchpin of it. And I think that's one thing that people always forget about him when he would go and approach a referee. Like, can you imagine being a referee and Cameron Smith has something to say to you? Somebody that has been through everything, has won everything, has been the best player on the best teams, some of them of all time at some levels, and he has something to say. It's like, it's undeniable that his opinion is going to carry more weight than pretty much, like, who would have more insight into rugby league ever than Cameron Smith? Like,
the beauty of it too is he knew when to play dumb as well.
Yeah.
So there was that semi-final against Parramatta a couple of years ago. I think it was 2019, and Parramatta make a break. Melbourne make a break, and there's a penalty blown against them, right? So Parramatta gets into position, they're ready to tap the ball, and Cameron walks over to the referee and goes, "Oh, what was that for?" And they said, "Oh, he was out of play. He wasn't behind the ruck." He goes, "What do you mean? When's that a rule?" And Cameron knows the rule. He's been playing for 20 years. He knows the rule 100%, but he goes up, plays dumb, makes the referee explain the rule to him, and by the time that's done, they've set the defensive line. And I was watching that and just went, that's just a lesson in how to approach the referee and buy your team time, and that's what Cameron was so good at.
Yeah, and like, a lot of people don't like him, and I've never had that feeling towards him. I've always been like, this guy's a genius. And on top of that, you've got a guy who plays in maybe the toughest position in the game, and he played for longer than anyone ever did, and never, like, I feel like he could pull on the boots next year and still be the best hooker in the game. Like, he never looked like he was physically losing anything, and he was always just there, ready to turn up on it. Just so happened to be he was also the best hooker probably of all time. Like, it was just this package, this complete package of a player, and that's why he is Cameron Smith. That's why he is the example. And I never got into the whole hatred of him. But I found it funny that people would get very, very upset about pretty much everything he did.
The only thing I disliked was his approach to the salary cap scandal. And as an Eels fan, I guess you can understand that. And that he continuously has had the line, and Bellamy's had it as well, that they won those premierships. Yeah. And for me, being one of the clubs that lost to them in a grand final, that hurts a lot. Yeah. Particularly when it was so clearly caught. There's no. It
wasn't a case of like, oh yeah, we just went over by a little bit. It was like they were literally trying to destroy the salary cap, and they knew what they were doing.
They were 20% over or 25% over. They're $1 million over a $6 million salary cap. Mm-hmm. But I mean, the idea that I don't get why people disliked him, for playing 400 games or being the leading point scorer, or just, I mean, you do get that with great players. They get a lot of hatred pointed towards them because unless they play for you, you don't want them to play well. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the same in almost every sport. The best players are always kind of dragged. There are very few. I mean, you even look at tennis, and Rafa Nadal has kind of only become kind of like the darling of tennis fans, really at the end of his career, despite him being a fantastic person. Often on the court, always a very good competitor. It's because Roger Federer was there, and Federer was impossible to hate, and Nadal was his nemesis. And there has to be heroes and villains in sporting culture. Someone's got to be good and someone's got to be bad. And Cameron Smith was the easy pantomime villain, particularly playing for Melbourne during their cheating scandal, and also playing for such a dominant Queensland side. And he played all the way through that. He was the last of the. Was he the last, or was no? He was the last of that group to retire from football. So he was, the nemesis of 15 other clubs, and then he was the nemesis of an entire state. And he becomes very easy then to hate. And I guess part of it also feeds into because he wouldn't give media interviews very often. He was very much in the background. So, as we saw when he was retiring, he wasn't the likes of James Hooper and that weren't particularly big fans of him either, because he basically wouldn't give them anything.
Yeah, exactly. He didn't give them the content that they wanted from him. We talked about that a lot on the podcast, where they were basically like, he has to retire. He has to announce it now. It's like he doesn't have to do anything. And I love the way that he basically did absolutely nothing. And it got to a point where they were basically about to name their team for round 1. And that's where it became official that he wasn't going to be on the side. I loved that. I thought it was fantastic. And I hope we see more of it. It reminds me a little bit of, from my point of view, it's a little bit of Tom Brady, talking about Tom Brady again, in that, people get upset at Tom Brady in a similar way. And you look at the Deflategate stuff. I mean, I guess that's their version of the salary cap drama that the Storm had, obviously on a different level in terms of alleged cheating by a team versus what the Storm were doing, which was out and out cheating. But, people that get on Tom Brady's case and they don't like him and stuff. And I kind of was lucky enough to be an NFL fan for long enough to remember when, not Drew Brees, what was his name? Who was the Patriots quarterback that got injured?
Drew Bledsoe.
That's it, Drew Bledsoe. He was a really good player. He was a really, really good player. And then when Brady come in, and it was like he was just a no-name backup, and to see him go on to become who he is, and like when he started, people were like, "Oh, Joe Montana's probably the best of all time," but you can make the case of for other quarterbacks. And now there's no case. It's over.
I mean, I'm a Green Bay Packers fan, so I'm very much in Aaron Rodgers' corner in that respect.
Mm-hmm.
The opinion I've got there is Brady is your perfect system quarterback, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of he will get the job done for you. For me, I know this is not an NFL podcast, but I'm like I said, I'm a big Aaron Rodgers fan. You can make a very compelling statistical argument for Aaron Rodgers in terms of his accuracy, his completion rate, his touchdown to intercept ratio,
Mm-hmm.
The level of excellence he's had at a team nowhere near as competitive as the Patriots.
Yeah.
I think he's only got to 3 or 4 championship games and the 1 Super Bowl, and a lot of those were due to the defensive side not keeping up their end of the bargain.
Yeah.
But I see the very obvious parallels between Brady and Smith in terms of there's a lot of hate directed at those types of players for not a lot of reason, and yeah, like you, I really enjoyed Cameron Smith saying nothing for 4 months and then retiring a week before the season started, and Kent and Hooper blowing a gasket over it because he wouldn't tell them anything.
They hated it. It's interesting. We can talk about NFL because it's my podcast, so we can do whatever we want. And another way I look at it is you look at someone like a Brett Favre, who was like a playmaker. He could make something out of nothing, and he could drag a team to a victory.
The gunslinger, but he could also lose you the game, as many Packers fans will tell you.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And then you get someone like a Peyton Manning, who's like a machine, and whose dad was a coach at lower levels, and him and his brother ended up being quarterbacks because that's what they were always going to be. And so they've all got their pluses and minuses. Like Montana is another one. There was a point where people would say, "Oh, Aikman, he's one of the better ones of all time," which I never really got, and I'm a Cowboys fan. But Aikman felt like he was a little bit more of a system guy as well. I mean, who would lose in some of them Cowboys teams he was in? And the thing I loved about Brady is that just the way that he has done it for so long. I mean, he's still playing in his mid-40s, and you'd be hard-pressed to not pick Tampa Bay to win this year. And for him to leave the Green Bay system and to go to another team. Yeah, and Green Bay. Yeah, sorry about that. To leave that New England system and then go to Tampa Bay, he was very smart with who he selected to go to, but to go there and just win the Super Bowl immediately was like, this guy is just something else. Like even Montana couldn't do that when he went to Kansas City, you know. There's something about those players. It's like Bill Russell in basketball. His statistics, some of his stats are amazing, but a lot of them you look at and you're like, well, you know, it's a little bit so-so. But then you read about what he was like as a player and as a competitor, and that he was just clearly the best player in the league. And you line up his stats against sometimes Wilt Chamberlain, who was doing ridiculous things that people still haven't been able to accomplish stats-wise. But people at that time were still like, oh, yeah, Bill Russell was the best player, and there was no doubt about it. I find it interesting when there's players like that. I think in rugby league, Darren Lockyer is a little bit in those terms as well. I
think he's a little slept on these days.
He is, isn't he?
You know, he's been retired now for nearly 10 years, so you can understand that a bit. But I remember watching him, and Lockyer was the best player in the game when he retired.
Mm-hmm.
But he was kind of superseded, I guess, by Thurston and Cronk, because everyone assumed Queensland's dominance would end with Lockyer.
Yeah.
And it didn't. It continued. And I think that's where a little bit of the shine came off his career. But, you know, people forget, you know, he was the best fullback in the world when he became a 5'8", and then became the best 5'8" in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That takes enormous, not just talent, but hard work to learn two positions and master them both. And no fullback, I believe, has really managed to do that to that extent. You know, Jerome Hughes started as a fullback. He's now a very good halfback, but he wasn't the best fullback in the world.
No.
When he changed positions, you know, they tried it with Jared Hayne, switching positions. They've tried it with Greg Inglis, and none of them really managed to nail down the halves position, because it's a different role to play. And again, you know, Lockyer, apart from his longevity, there aren't a lot of stats, you know, to really point at. He wasn't a prolific point scorer, and he wasn't a prolific try scorer either. But the effect he had on Brisbane, I mean, it's no surprise that Brisbane haven't won a title since he's retired, really. I mean, I know they had a very, very good core there in terms of Petro and Shane Webke and Tony Carroll. And then, you know, they brought the young blokes through like your Corey Parkers and Sam Thaidays. But it's Lockyer that was the leader, you know, in many respects. You know, he got them around the field. He set the tone. And with Cameron Smith, it's very similar, although the Melbourne's just this kind of unstoppable machine. Everyone thought they'd drop off, and they've got better.
I'm telling you, they're about to fall off a cliff. You watch. When Brett Camorley leaves them, they're stuffed. I love those plays where they're so good that they just refuse. It's like they refuse to lose. Lockyer was like, he was maybe the best example I've ever seen in rugby league outside of Cameron Smith, in terms of, I saw so many test matches and Origin games where they'd lost, and it was just like, no. It was like at the end of The Matrix when Neo resurrects himself. He was like, no, we're not doing this. And he really is. He's one of those players that I'm shocked he doesn't get mentioned more, because he's one of the best 5 players I've ever seen play.
Well, there's that try that Dannon Kemp keeps dining out on, that one on the buzzer. And that's been ingrained in my mind as an Eels fan since it happened. I remember watching that live and just going, no, that didn't happen. Right? Because I remember watching it, and I think might be Brendan Oak or Broderick Wright shoots out the line at Lockyer, and I pretty much said, don't do that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
As he did, I said, don't do that. And of course, Lockyer sees him coming, beats him, you know, steadies himself, puts the kick over, and it sits up perfectly. Like, the bounce could not have been better. If it goes a little bit lower, you know, maybe he knocks it on, or he stumbles, and, you know, he's got Joel Reddy, he's got Eric Groth, and he's got Luke Burt coming after him. You know, those are all pretty quick guys. If he stumbles, he's getting put into touch. But the ball sits up perfectly, and that was just Lockyer to a T. And again, there's no surprise that the final game of his career was him slotting a field goal to win the match.
With the smashed face.
Yeah, which you would not see in these days. He would have been off for a HIA. He wouldn't have been coming back. But, the toughness, and I know there's a difference between toughness and stupidity, but it took a lot of toughness to stay on the field with a broken bone in your face. And then to deal with the pressure of landing that field goal, pretty much knowing you're not playing the next week.
Yeah. And me and Andrew talked about in the last episode when you understand you're watching a historic moment, and excuse me, it doesn't happen often where you're watching a game and you're like, oh, this is something that I'll be talking about in 10 years. And I remember that game with Lockyer, and when he got hit in the head, I think it was friendly fire from his teammate.
Yeah, I think it was Jared Beale.
Yeah, were they going through for a kick or something?
I think Beale jumped over him to contest a bomb and caught Lockyer in the face.
And and that moment where Lockyer is holding his face, and you just know he's gone, and he just refused. He just refused to let it beat him, and to not only just stay out there, but to be the pivotal reason why they went on to win in extra time. Like, you knew you were watching history, and Darren Lockyer is just something else. And I could see he's another one you could write about in, 20 years' time and say you had to witness it, because the stats don't tell you what he could do.
They don't tell you the effect he had on Brisbane, and how he kind of came into his own when Alan Langer left, and it was, it's kind of like Melbourne are today. They lost. Well, they didn't lose Wally Lewis. Bennett got rid of him.
Yeah. Which
you go, how do you get rid of that? And then you've got Alan Langer, and then after Langer you've got Lockyer, and how he pretty much outshined them. I know they still refer to Wally as the king. I think that's a bit. His origin credentials aren't in dispute, but I think there's a bit of rose-colored glass, like we've referred to him as the king, so we're keeping him there. But I think in terms of an overall impact on the NRL and rugby league itself, I think Lockyer ended up having the bigger impact at Brisbane, considering the start of his career was when they were very successful at the end of during the 90s, through to when he's leading the team in 2006.
And the funny thing is, people forget with Lockyer's first Test match, it was one of the worst Test debuts I've ever seen in my life. He was a disaster in his Test debut. And it's funny to think that player would go on to be one of the great Australian Test players of all time, and one of the best captains we've ever had as well.
I think he might even still hold the record for most appearances for the Kangaroos, because I'm not sure if Cameron Smith ended up beating him, because at the start of Smith's career, Danny Badiris was the hooker, and it took a while for Cameron Smith to kind of unseat him in that position. But Lockyer, because of his longevity and his ability to play in two positions, I think he might still hold that record.
I think he does, yeah. I think it's him.
Because I think it's around 50 or 60 games.
Yeah, once you get to that 50-game mark, there's very few that have played more than 50 games. I have always loved that Danny Badiris, and when Badiris stepped down, and he only took a break from playing as the Test captain, as the Test hooker, and he wanted an off season, and it was fair enough. He'd played a lot of footy, and I remember thinking, man, this is not what you do when you're in that position. You don't give your place to anyone else, and he never got it back. Smith held it until he wanted to step down from Test footy.
Yeah, it's Lockyer that still holds the record at 59.
There you go.
Smith's at 56.
It's incredible they played that many games.
Yeah, considering it's not like union or cricket where you get 8-10 games a year. You get 2 or 3, and you might play a tournament once every couple of years. So because he's listed at 2006 to 2017, 11 years as the Australian hooker. Most players would kill to play 11 years in the NRL, let alone represent Australia for 11 years.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting when you talk about stats and how you can. It's hard to make a case for how great a player is. You also look at the opposite end, and I think of Like one day someone's going to sit down and look at the state of origin stats and say, wow, that Mitchell Pearce must have been amazing.
Yeah.
They just picked him all the time. Tell me about One Ideal, because it's one of the old school rugby league websites. I can't remember when it started, but it has been around for a long, long time. And it's still the number one Eels website going around. Tell me a little bit about it, how you got involved in it, and what you know about the site's history too, because I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure it started around 2004, but it didn't start as a community that it is now. So Phil Sim is the original owner, and he's currently on the Eels Leagues Club, so the Parramatta Leagues Club board, which is why I own it at the moment. I'm basically custodian for him, essentially. And so he started in 2004 just like an opinion site for himself. I think it was on Blogspot, so one of those old blogging platforms. And it got some traction because 2004 was the year, if I remember correctly, that Jamie Lyon departed Parramatta. And that's actually where I first heard about it. But, you just jump on, you Google Jamie Lyon Parramatta, and I was delivered to One Ideal, and that's where the little community started. So it was there for about 4 or 5 years on Blogspot. And then in 2009, he moved it to an actual social media platform, which is where the site still hosts now. We've had a couple of different iterations of it and updated. So it looks a lot more modern than the old kind of bulletin boards. But yeah, so Phil started in 2004 and I took over at the start of last year. And it's an interesting community to run and be a part of. So I really got involved in it in 2010. So I signed up then, and that's when I did a little bit of writing there. I didn't want to be a journalist at the time. I just liked following Parramatta, and I do a match report here and there. I do a little bit of analysis here and there. And it was actually Phil who said, you can write. So have you considered a career in journalism? And that's how I ended up here, basically, to cut a long story short. And the kind of the sad thing is we've never been around on the current platform when the Eels have played a grand final. Yeah. So there's nothing on the site actually with us being anywhere near kind of successful. The site was shifted at the end of 2009, so after the grand final, to where it is now. Yeah. And obviously that precipitated quite a dark era, which, considering the site's growth in that period, is a little surprising, because people don't really want to talk about their team when they're losing and when they're not going well. And I remember those days being quite tough as an Eels fan, watching us just collect 2 wooden spoons and never really being around the finals. And then it's the same when I've spoken to different people at different clubs. When the team wins, everything goes up. And once Brad Arthur took over in 2014 to probably 2017, I'd say, was probably the real peak of the site, because we were back in the finals contention. We were playing good footy. There was plenty to talk about, and there were a lot of different news with different opinions on there. So a couple of those guys have left to form the Cumberland Throw. And they provide, some really. So they kind of started, I guess, almost testing out. So they were doing training reports. They were covering the lower grades at One-Eyed. They were doing all that type of stuff that they're now doing at a bigger scale on the Cumberland Throw. But I see the two sites operating kind of almost side by side in a way. So you have One-Eyed, which is very much, it's a very, very passionate fan base, and that's part of the challenge of running a site like that. Yeah. Is you don't want to remove anyone from the site. You don't want to delete anyone's comment just because it's pointed, at the team. We don't tolerate bashing of players unnecessarily. We don't tolerate abuse of players or officials or anything like that. But we're not going to stop anyone from saying that was a shit performance. Yeah, and getting very riled up about that. I've got no problem with that being on the site. But it's learning. It's learning how to manage that, because there are people on the side who don't want to bash the team. And I get that as well. As a supporter, you want to try and support the team through each game. But being an Eels fan, that can be very, very difficult to do, as it was a couple of weeks ago.
And managing those different dynamics of different sorts of fans too, where there's the sort of fan that says you got to support the team no matter what, and then there's others who want to be able to vent their frustration. There's others who will, I mean, there's so many different opinions about what is wrong with a certain club, who the problem is. So, and then you've got the person that thinks it's the one player and it's always that one player. And if they just got rid of him, they'd be fine.
So we've had that a lot. So Matt Keating was kind of that for a while. And then Joseph Paulo took over that kind of that role, and then Corey Norman. And occasionally now it is Mitchell Moses, although some of that has been directed towards Dylan Brown, which I think is unfair to both of them, particularly given the way Mitch has been playing the past couple of seasons. And if you wanted to get an indication of how bad Parramatta's halves history has been, he's now the most capped halfback we've had in history behind Peter Sterling. So he's only just played over 100 games for us, which, a club with, I think, 74 years of history, and we've only got one half to back up our greatest of all time with over 100 games. So yeah, you do see that. You do see kind of, and I guess it's human nature. You want to try and find the one reason that everything's going wrong, and that in rugby league and as in life, it's never that simple. But also, you like you said, you do get that mix of supporters who believe you should always support the team, and I'm kind of one of those. I will say, I did call for Brad Arthur to be sacked a couple of weeks ago after Manly did us by 50 points.
Yeah.
And I'm still not 100% sold on him taking us forward because of those 6 weeks. And hell, if he wins the comp this year, okay, I'll wear that. But I would never watch Parramatta and hope they'd lose. I'd never do that.
No.
As down in the dumps as I was after that Manly game, and then that kind of very scrappy win over the Cowboys, I had prepared a Netflix show to turn on at halftime of the Melbourne game if things went south, but I never turned that on going, I hope they lose.
Yeah.
I kind of turned it on with a little bit of optimism going, this could be the one game where we actually just go, screw it, we're going to turn up this week. And they did. They really did turn up, and that was so great for myself to see. But we do have some of those people on the site that can get very down on the team, and I've never really seen anyone say, "I hope the team loses." There might have been one or two people who've said that, but you do get some saying, "Oh, look, if the team was to lose, I think that the coach has got to go this week or that week." And yeah, I actually kind of think it might be a bit 50-50 because you get that discussion too when fans boo their team because they're playing poorly. And I don't do that, but I can 100% understand a fan who does do that. And I think it should be up to the fan to decide if they should boo the team or not. And my belief that you don't comes from being a Liverpool supporter as well. The club motto of "You'll never walk alone" is big for me. So I don't see the benefit in hammering a team when they're down. But like I said, if you feel like you want to and you feel that's the way to express yourself, then again, I don't really have a problem with it.
Yeah, like I don't think I've ever booed a team I've supported. I've been very filthy on them. Like I've been like, fuck these guys, especially if you feel like they're not putting in the effort. Like there's a difference between having a bad team and then a team that just doesn't put in the effort. But like I could see, say, a West Tigers fan when they come out the round after Tommy Raudonikis had passed away and they put on a pathetic performance in that next game.
That pissed me off.
Yeah, that did me too. I think that's a black mark on all of those players that played in that game for the West Tigers because that was disgraceful, the effort that they put in for such an important game. And I would have booed that team if I'd supported them. But I've never felt that sort of thing of where I'd boo the team. I'd just be more filthy on their performance.
Yeah. So basically, if Parramatta lose, I don't sleep. And I found that that's quite normal across a lot of our fans.
Yeah.
And it's very much a case of, I don't think there's been really any game where they've necessarily given up. I think even in that Manly game, they were still having a crack. It was just one of those things where, you start bad and it just gets worse, and you can see it happening. And I've played at, I played sport from when I was 6 to when I was, for 20 years or so. And you have those games, right, where you turn up with all the good intention in the world, and inside the first 5 minutes you go, oh, well, this is shit. And you kind of, once you get into there, you can't dig yourself out of that. And I think that's what happened in the Manly game. And then, 2 weeks later, they turn it around against Melbourne, which has given me a bit of optimism heading into the finals this year as well. Because that was my major worry. I thought if we get pasted by Melbourne, we are cooked, essentially.
Yeah, it would have, part of me thought that was going to happen, and it would have been a club turning moment. Like Arthur would have gone, I think, if the Storm had have whipped them. As it turned out, it was a very, very good win by them. And that's the interesting thing right now, and why I started thinking, man, it'd be cool to have you on, and then you'd emailed me. It was really cool. In that the Eels have a really interesting dynamic now, in that they've been together for a long time as that unit. They've had some pretty good additions this year that have come into the side, but even like you think of Papali'i, who's come in and he's been fantastic running out wide for them. He's really added something extra to the side that they really needed. But they just haven't clicked this year. And Mitch Moses hasn't looked like the Mitch Moses he was at. It's probably up to about halfway through last year where he picked up that injury. And I feel like that injury was worse than they ever let on. Part of me thinks that they were saying that it was his calf. I wonder if it did have something to do with his Achilles, because he just looks like a player that has not been the same since. But they have that awesome win against the Storm. And the weird thing for me is that they've rested so many players coming in against the Panthers. And I feel like there's 2 teams in the competition right now that need game time together. One of them's the Panthers, because they've had players that have been injured and things like that, and they just need game time together to get back to where they were. The other one's the Eels. I don't think they could afford to drop these players. I think they needed to carry that momentum forward. What do you think about that?
So I had a bit of mixed feelings when Brad said he was going to rest a few players. I can understand guys like Papali'i, Nathan Brown. I think Nathan's missed 1 game this year, and I think Ice might have missed 1 or none. And they have done a huge amount of work in the middle, particularly Papa, just in the middle on the edge. He came to us as a bench player. He's now a starting player, and I think he, particularly after that effort against Melbourne, he deserved a rest. Yeah. I think because last year we really ran out of gas at the end of the year. There was no Melbourne like performance at the end of last year, really. No. We didn't have that in us, and we were absolutely cooked. So I can understand Brad saying he looked back at last year, and really there's not a lot of room for us to move on the ladder. I mean, people are saying, he's thrown away top 4. I went, well, he hasn't really. Manly's playing the Cowboys, who probably couldn't fight their way out of a wet paper bag at the moment. They played pretty well against St George, but St George was shocking. And the way Manly's been playing, I looked at, I think it was Carlos at the Rugby League eye test. He said since round 6, the only team that's performed better than Manly has been Melbourne. And if Manly can't beat the Cowboys, then just put a line through them, basically. So Parramatta's either going to finish 5th or 6th. Doesn't really matter. There's no such thing as a home final this year. You're not really going to finish 4th. You need a result to go your way. You're talking about a mathematical equation you have no real control over at the end of the day. I was surprised that he's rested Penasini. I guess his justification there was, Tom Opacek's been out for a few weeks, so you got to get him some game time. he's playing Blake Ferguson, and Fergo's had a couple of injuries this year, and he's played some reserve grade for us. I like the fact that he's giving Bryce Cartwright, Keegan Hipgrave, and Ray Stones some minutes, particularly in the back row. I mean, I was really pleased to see Cartwright get the minutes he did last week, and not only that, but brought on at the time he did 10 minutes before half time. I think that's perfect for him because he adds so much in terms of your ability to attack. He changes the way you can attack, which Parramatta has been missing. Hipgrave, funnily enough, I think he's 8 from 8 or 9 from 9 this season. He hasn't lost the game for us. So that could bode poorly for your Panthers, mate. He's an undefeated streak for Parramatta. And Ray Stone is one of those guys that I think he's going to be a bit part player throughout much of his career.
Yeah.
I think had he played 10 years earlier, he'd be perfect. He's got a little bit of the Ray Price about him in the aggression he's got in defence, and the way that he takes down opponents much bigger than himself. I think he dropped someone against Melbourne, and it was like a textbook tackle around the hips, just picked him up and dropped him on his back. It might have been Justin Olam, who's not an easy guy to tackle. So I was a bit mixed, and then I saw the team, and I very much understand. I mean, no one can accuse Brad of not trying something different. I guess is the point I'm trying to make is the past couple of years he's gone, nah, this is our top 17, top 18. We're going with that for the last month of the season. And then we're going to ask them to step up a year and play another month as hard as they can. It's very difficult to do that. Okay, if we get beat against Penrith, I think some people have said that might destroy their confidence. I don't think it does because you're taking so many of those players out of the team then for the following week.
Yeah.
And I think, you put Mitchell Moses back in the side, you put Dylan Brown back in the side, you put Clint Gutherson back in the side. Some of them are probably very convenient resting. Gutho wouldn't be playing probably this week regardless. They said he's got some bruising on his knee, and obviously Junior suspended and Ryan Madison suspended. So they're not even available to play. And as I said, Junior Paulo himself has played not only huge minutes for us, but he's had to shoulder the workload of no Regan Campbell-Gillard and play Origin. So him being out of the engine room isn't. It's a massive loss, but it's not really a huge surprise. I think Brad said if he wasn't suspended, he'd be rested this week. And then you got some opportunity for some of these young blokes to put their hand up and say I want to be part of that 17 next week. Guys like Oregon Kafusi and I know he's not young, but Makahesi Makatoa as well. And then the guys getting their debuts, Samuel Loizu, Kai Rodwell, and Kai we picked up from Souths during the year. Those types of guys, they're not going to be in the 17, but this is their opportunity. This is a chance for them to say, hey, if you need me, if there's injuries, I can do the job. And I think you're probably going to see, you're not going to see a very polished performance from Parramatta this week. You're probably going to see a very committed performance. And there's going to be a lot of guys. I mean, probably guys like your Tom Opaceks, your Hayes Dunsters, Blake Fergusons, even Will Smith. Will Smith's going to be battling to say he can be the 14th man. He can be the utility on the bench. You're going to have a fair few of those guys going, this is my opportunity to show Brad that I can play finals football. Which I think is a benefit to the team. If you're trying to build that winning culture and you're trying to be one of those teams really, looking at that preliminary final, because that's what Parramatta wants to be. I spoke to a few people at the club at the start of the year, and that was what they were big on, was improving on last year and really getting deep into the finals and not going out in straight sets.
Yeah.
And you need everyone to go with you, and Melbourne's so good at that. And the Roosters, as they've shown you, no other team, maybe Melbourne, definitely, I don't think Penrith, they got done by the Tigers when they were missing 6 players.
Mm-hmm.
The Roosters' culture of next man up is just, it's phenomenal to just go, all right, they've had Adam Kieran who's a half, go play in the centres and he'll do the job there.
Yeah.
And you get guys like, Isaac Liu, he's been around for a long time. He's leaving the club, but he steps into the breach whenever there's an injury in the middle forwards, whether it's Jared Rawira-Hargraves or it's Siasawa Takiaho, or if it's Victor Radley, he'll just come up and do the job. And I think the player who epitomised that the most was Mitchell Orbison.
Yeah.
Just 300 plus games for the club, played everywhere, halves, hooker, back row, lock, centres. You told him to play prop, he'd play prop. And it's very much, you've got to build that next man up mentality, and you've got to give those guys opportunities. And that's why I'm pretty relaxed about this week. I'm kind of looking forward to the game and not being really on the edge of my seat, because there's not really too much that can come out of it. And I guess the positive of not seeing Mitch out there, not seeing Gutho, is I'm not worried about them getting injured, which I think is a big part of Brad's decision making this week. Is Mitch has had a couple of injuries this year, back injury, and obviously Gutho's knee isn't right. So you want them for the first week of the finals. You don't want to send them out in round 25. And at this stage of the season, something as simple as a rolled ankle can put you out.
Yeah.
So you don't want to risk that coming into the finals.
Yeah, we're like Adam Reynolds. I mean, we've seen how many times the Souths have come into the finals absolutely on fire. And Adam Reynolds picked something up in the last couple of weeks, and it's basically all over for Souths because of that. The other thing, too, with the way the Eels are, like, I think if they went into that top four, at the moment, I don't think they're ready for that. And I know that's a weird thing to say because, man, you got to be ready for the finals. But I could see it a situation where if they lost because they're in the top four, say they played the Storm in week one, I could see where that would really hurt their confidence to the point where they couldn't come back from that. Whereas because they're playing against them bottom teams in the first week of the finals, they're definitely class above those teams. They should win. And I feel as though they can get a bit of momentum out of that. And then they're coming in against a team that has lost their first round game. You know what I mean? And Look, that's a lot of looking into the crystal ball, but that's why I think where the Eels are situated right now is so interesting to me, because it could go really well for them and just everything works out their way. They get their players back, they get that first game up in the finals, a bit of confidence and stuff, or it could go really, really terribly for them as well. And I find that really interesting. And the other thing is too, like, if it went terribly for them, they're getting a new coach. They probably are going to change their lineup and stuff. So there's a lot riding on this next couple of weeks. It's very, very interesting for the Eels.
Yeah, like you said, the top four, I think, adds a certain level of pressure and expectation, because there's always that stat every year: no one outside the top four wins the premiership. I mean, eventually someone's going to make history and do it. And I don't think Parramatta's going to win the comp this year, but I think they've got the style of play to upset those top four teams when it comes to the finals, as they showed against Melbourne. Melbourne were ready to go last week. They might not have looked it, but I think there was a fair bit of the pressure Parramatta put them under, led to a lot of those mistakes. And the fact that Parramatta got ahead on the scoreboard a couple of times, I think, fed into that. And finals are all about that. It's all about how do you handle the pressure that's applied to you. And I mean, they're probably playing maybe Newcastle, I think, the first week of the finals, or if they finish fifth, whoever scrapes in that bottom 8 spot. This season's a historical season in terms of poor teams making the finals. The bottom two sides are going to have a negative differential. I never particularly like seeing Parramatta play after a bye. So if they were to make top four and beat Melbourne for a third time, or Penrith, manage to beat Penrith, they have the week off, and they never really handled that week off fantastically. Whereas I think having them play, essentially as a coach, you guys have got 4 games left of the season. That's what your goal is when you come into the finals. And I always feel better when Parramatta get that kind of role of consistency.
Yeah, and it's because they needed something. That's why that Storm game was so important. Like, without that performance, if we hadn't seen that performance out of them, I think most people felt like they were done. I know we've said it on the podcast. A couple of weeks ago, were like, the Eels are finished. And that's what was so shocking about that performance against the Storm and how complete it was. And there's not many people, not many teams can put in a complete performance like that against the Storm, and they just flat out beat them. There was no ways around it, They beat them fair and square. And yeah, I just found it really interesting. They come out of that game and rested so many players. I think that, I know some of them needed rest, and there were a couple of little injuries here or there that'll be nice to not have to worry about going into the final series. But man, it is a gamble, but I guess it's one Brad Arthur has to take at this point, because he knows if it goes pear-shaped for him, he is out of a job.
Yeah. And I think in many ways, had they fielded a full strength lineup this week, a lot of pressure gets heaped on them, because you go, well, you beat Melbourne last week. You're going to beat Penrith this week.
Yeah.
He's taken basically all the pressure off the side this week. And he's getting the opportunity to kind of fine tune them for the finals as they head into the first week. And I also think that you almost get a way to reset and go, okay, most of you aren't playing this week. Forget what happened against Melbourne. You get basically 2 weeks off. What we did against Melbourne, you've now got to do for another 4 weeks. And I think it's easier to say that than say you've got to do it for 6 weeks. If they had to play again this week.
And look, as a Panthers fan, when I saw that Eels game against the Storm and I saw the reaction of the Eels fans, and, I understand it. It was a great, great win. But I messaged some of my Panthers friends, and I was like, man, this is set up really nice for us coming into this last round. And now it's completely different. The dynamic is different once again in terms of now going into this game. It's a very different Parramatta team. The Panthers' attack is not where you want it to be just yet. And it's like, man, if we lost this game, it would be a real shattering sort of loss to our confidence. And that's why I find this game is so interesting. It's just these two different teams with two different dynamics. And because I think that it's this kind of the Storms to lose at this point, because they've been so good so far this season. And, as a Panthers fan, you kind of think, well, the Panthers are so young, they've got their premiership window is going to be pretty long. But so if they lose this year, it's not the end of the world. But for the Eels, I think that there's so much riding on the next few weeks that, I could see new coach, new players, all sorts.
There's a coach's career that's on the line this season. And I think there's also, I don't agree with Paul Kent saying Parramatta's not in a premiership window. They're in that at the moment. They showed that against Melbourne. It's now the case of making that a consistent performance. They perform anywhere near that level in the first probably 2 weeks of the finals. They're into the preliminary final.
Yeah.
I haven't seen Parramatta probably play like that since they beat Melbourne in round 2, which was a very different game. That kind of monsoonal type weather that they kicked Melbourne to death. But it was every player playing to their, I wouldn't say the best of their ability, but kind of sticking to the game plan and playing outside it when they needed to. That was what was really pleasing. And
that's the problem with the Eels too. I feel like they're consistent and they're always there physically, but I felt like teams worked them out last year, and they didn't have wrinkles to their attack that they could, still keep breaking teams open. And I think that that's the big key for them, is to have those different parts of their game and attack where, they can just give you a different look.
Yeah, they changed their style against Melbourne. And it was quite noticeable, that when they rucketed the ball out their own end, there were a couple of carries from the backs before they tried to shift to the edges to pull the Melbourne shape out. And when they didn't do that, they sent someone in behind the ruck to target the A defenders. But it was really in good ball that they stopped the side to side movement, just one side to the other. They sent one or two big boys through the middle, whether it was Junior Paulo or Ice, sucked in the Melbourne defenders. They squeezed up because that's what every side does when their middle's threatened. And then they were really, really crisp with their backline movements. And the thing that really, I think, was really, really obvious was how well the lines were being run by the decoys. They were a genuine option. Will Penasini did his job as a centre playing running the crash line, whether it was Ice or if it was Murata running the unders line for Mitch or Dylan Brown to give them a genuine option. That paid off with Fergo's try, and that paid off with Dunster's try on the other side of the field. And then you had that really good bit of eyes up footy on the short side where they put Joey Lussick away eventually, and that was just pure counting numbers and Mitch Moses knowing when to run the ball and pick off the defenders the way he did. And it's that type of football that wins you finals. There wasn't a lot of low percentage play in that. There wasn't a bunch of offloads. There wasn't a bit of luck. It was just pure football, and it was executed to perfection. And Melbourne scored a try the same way. A lot of Eels fans screaming at the left edge getting torn apart, but almost every side plays like that these days.
Yeah.
And it was attack executed really well. A really good kicking game, apart from a couple grubbers that either went dead or got picked off by Melbourne's defenders, but also a willingness to contest the bomb. But pleasingly, all 4 tries are through the hands and not off the boot, which has been a bit of a bugbear for Parramatta fans. Not so much that we score a lot of tries off kicks, but we're not a great threat with the ball in hand. That Melbourne game showed we are. And I think it might have a few of those bottom 8 sides a bit worried coming into the finals because they're not the same side that played 3 weeks ago.
No.
And that's a big thing coming into finals.
It really is. And it's, man, if a team needed a win, it was that win for the Eels against the Storm. It's really changed the whole outlook of what is possible for this season because, if they're playing against the Storm in a preliminary final in a few weeks from now, or even the grand final, they can look back and say, well, we did it not that long ago. And I think that's huge. It made the whole end of the season so much more interesting for me because I think that they're going to walk through the first week of the finals. I would not like to be taking them on in that next round as one of the top sides that have lost, the top 4 sides that have lost. So it's all setting up a little bit nicely for the Eels. I hope that this resting in this game works out all right. But as you say, it took pressure off them. Like it as a Panthers fan, I was really disappointed. I was like, man, I want to take these guys on right now and see what they've got and how it works out. Because I think if they'd lost against the Panthers full strength coming off that Melbourne game, it would have been a little bit shattering for the Eels. But that none of that matters now.
I think Channel 9's a little bit upset too because they was circled this game and got 2 top 4 teams full strength last game of the round. It could be a minor premiership to contest, and then Parramatta goes, here's our New South Wales Cup side.
I know, right? Anytime Channel 9's upset, though, it's a good thing, I reckon.
Oh, yeah, it's fantastic.
Now, with the One Idea website, are there some people you want to give a shout out to? Because people love hearing their own usernames and stuff like that. And I want you to give shout outs to people, but I want you to miss out some people that are going to be really upset too and hate you forever about it.
There's 2 particular blokes I'll mention. So there's Hell on Eels, and there's Professor Daz, and those 2, they do the match previews each week, and it's kind of next level. They throw in a bit of, they get really creative. I've had George Orwell theme, I've had Shakespeare themes, and they'll like pick a book out or a play or something and use that as the metaphor for the game that's about to be played. Yeah. And then the level of statistical analysis put into it as well. We get infographics, we get breakdowns by coach, by points scored, points defended, where tries are scored, where we concede them. It's a lot of work, and it's been fantastic to have them doing that for this season, and it has helped me out a lot because normally I'd be doing the previews and I don't have the time to do what they do.
Mm-hmm. And what about some of the forum regulars?
Okay, so I'll give a shout out to Snake. He's been there a while, and he rubs me up the wrong way occasionally, but he is a bit of a pest, but he's very entertaining. On the site, you've also got Grunter, who actually does our match day blog. So whatever match day it is, he throws it up. Might be quick, might be long. Usually pretty entertaining, and it's always good to know that someone's going to look after that for us. And then you've got a new bloke this season, Electric Analysis, and he's been doing. He's a bit newer, but he's been around a fair bit on the site this season. He's been doing statistical breakdowns after games and what players have been standing out. And he funnily enough, he really backed Wonga Blake during the season when Wonga was with that terrible run of form, and he said, there's a real issue with Parramatta's defensive structure, and apart from Wonga missing some one-on-one tackles, he was fairly right in that respect. Given the way that our defensive structure still got pulled apart regardless of who played where Wonga was and whoever that was moved around. So I thought that was, it was tough to go up for him to stand up and say that when he got absolutely shouted down for it. But he stuck around and has really provided some really good statistical analysis, which is kind of what the site's been missing a little bit since some of those guys went off to the Cumberland throw.
Mm. And I love that sort of thing where someone decides to look at going against the grain, and they start to look at, is this really a problem or is it a perceived problem? I love that sort of writing and that sort of thinking, because I think it's very easy to get dragged along with the current in terms of thinking in rugby league, and it's cool to see more and more people starting to look at the game in different ways, and it's cool that they're getting attention for it finally. It's fantastic to see.
Yeah. And just quickly, I'll also give a shout out to one of our former members, Sir Cole. He passed away during the year up in Redcliffe. He'd been part of the site basically since it had started, and he was kind of he was probably close to the oldest member of the site, and he'd Parramatta supporter since the 50s, and he kind of really provided a different point of view to everything because he'd kind of seen everything, and so the site really misses his contributions as well, and none of his family really got his affinity for the Eels or rugby league, but he was very, very welcome on the site, and it's been a bit different not having him around to drop in occasionally and give his 2 cents.
Yeah, it's and that's what makes that website so amazing, is that because it's been around for so long and it's had that following, and it has been the place to go if you're an Eels fan. You get so many different Eels fans, like you get the new Eels fans, you get older Eels fans. It's fantastic to have that mix, and I've always loved that site. Like, I don't think I'm a member of it a Panthers fan going onto an Eels forum, it's not, I did that arguing when I was an Australian going onto all the English fan sites, and I'm just not interested in doing that sort of thing anymore. But I always loved the fact that the site was there and it had such a great following, and that was just a great place for Eels fans to meet. And I was like, I know when you emailed me and you were like, I'm involved in One-Eyed Eels, I was like, oh, this is fantastic. I was so excited, I was like, oh, I love that website. It's great.
Yeah, it's a fantastic community that's stuck around for, we're getting close to 20 years. If we're going to consider as 2004 as the start, 17 years of
same age as my website, hey?
Mm.
Which is crazy to think about. Now, where can people follow you and all of your, tell us where we can follow all of your rugby league online pursuits, your social media, and your OnlyFans?
Unfortunately, we're getting banned off OnlyFans. So One Ideal obviously is oneideal.com. There is a Facebook page and a Twitter. You can find us at One Ideal. It's not a lot of content comes out through there. Most of our stuff comes via Google and Eels fans just going straight to One Ideal. For the Rugby League Monthly stuff, we're on Twitter and Facebook at League Monthly, so you can find that stuff there, and that's generally where I'll post the latest editions and kind of some things that I find interesting. I've got my own Twitter handle, which is at Elliott Richard1. You'll probably get some more just kind of general league news and discussion there as well. So I've got it's ELLIOTT Richard1. So I got a double T in there. But at League Monthly is generally where the stuff for Rugby League Monthly will come through, and you can go to rugbyleaguemonthly.com, and that's got everything there. And I will let everyone know that it is partially paywalled. So the feature articles and the stuff that I put a huge amount of effort into is paywalled. That's $5 a month, but it's free for the first month. So if you wanted to get in there and have a look around and see if it's worth it, you can. And there's, it's easy to stick around for the first month and then go, you know what, I don't really want to stick around any longer, and you can leave without a problem in that regard. And actually, today was the September issue. So we have an interview with Ryan Morgan, who played for Parramatta, Melbourne, St Helens and London, about what he's doing since he's retired from footy. We've got an ongoing series on concussion and head knocks in rugby league and how that's being assessed and treated and understood in the rugby league community. And then our free content is looking at, will players eventually sit games out like they do in the NFL when they're renegotiating contracts? What it's like to kind of say goodbye to live footy now for 2021, because most of us are in New South Wales. We're not going to see a live game. We're not going to see the grand final live. And each month I do a trivia. There's a quiz. There's a quiz there. It's a 10-question quiz. This month it's on the women's NRLW. I had planned for it to be a lead into the NRLW season. Unfortunately, that's being delayed. But yeah, that's what's kind of available now.
And it's really good content. And I would say to anybody, go and check it out, sign up, and as Elliot said, have a look and it's. I always think that if you can support independent rugby league outlets, do it, and you'll find there's people out there that are creating content that you will really, really enjoy. And, Rugby League Monthly is one of the newer ones out there. And, I think it's fantastic that you're doing it. And most importantly, and it's something that you said towards the start of the podcast, you decided to build something for yourself. And I think there's a lot of people out there that write about rugby league or they create content for rugby league and they miss the boat in building something for themselves. And it's important. I think that it's cool if you get to start somewhere else, but then if you'll enjoy it and you want to take it to that next level, make your own thing, because then no one can take it away from you. No one can tell you what to do. No one can stop you. No one can feel like they've got, their audience that they can pull the rug from underneath you. If you build your own thing, it's yours and you're the boss. And I think that's important, because sometimes people on websites, and I found this over the whole course of running websites, sometimes people are very strange and they can run hot and cold sometimes, and you just don't need to be part of it when you can run your own thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there are some great content creators. I've mentioned the guys at the Cumberland Throw. You can tell they're doing it because they love Parramatta. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the way that they show it. You've got the guys at Rugby League writers, Oscar and Jason. They just love their footy. You read that stuff and they're rugby league nerds, and I love that because I'm one of them as well. Yeah. And then you've got guys like Liam at Pythago NRL, if that's however you say it. You've got Carlos at the Rugby League Eye Test. Look, I'm sorry if I miss anyone out, but there is some fantastic content out there being produced by fans of the game. And I think it's adding so much to the way we view the game. Like, I've learnt stuff reading rugby league writers, and I've learnt stuff reading those stats guys break down how 6 agains are awarded. And even as a mad Eels fan, I always learn stuff when I go and read the Cumberland Throw. And then I get my fill of debauchery listening to your podcast and the guys that's former legend. What's their podcast?
Full credit to the boys.
Full credit to the boys.
Yeah.
And there's a little tribute to them. If you go look at the free article section of the site, you can give full credit to the boys there.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, there's little kind of thing there. They were kind of one of the first footy podcasts I listen to. So,
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, like you said, there's plenty of people out there doing this because they love it. And I think it definitely comes across in the content they provide. They're doing it because they enjoy it. And yeah, if you've got a couple of bucks to spare and you wanted to pop it down somewhere, I'd be very grateful. But I know there are other guys out there. I think the Cumberland Throw have a Patreon, and I know Rugby League writers, they do some paywalled stuff and some newsletters as well. And I'm a member of their site. I stumped up for that. So yeah, I think it's fantastic for footy fans to get involved there.
Yeah, make it rain. Otherwise, you're going to get more friggin' Braithen Astor and Blocker Roach and, another article by whoever. It's like some of the people I get writing articles on the mainstream websites, you think to yourself, bloody hell, like it's like getting blood from a stone, getting a thought from some of these people.
Less NRL 360, more Rugby League Monthly. I'll just say that.
100% agree. 100% agree. Well, look, it's been awesome having you on. I'll get you on again because I can tell we can go down some rabbit holes. I love it when I can talk to somebody and it's like, oh yeah, this person, we can go and find some really weird shit to talk about.
100%, mate. I'd be happy to come back on.
Thank you for coming on. Thank you to everyone for listening. A big shout out to everyone at One Ideals, and we'll catch you all later.
No worries. Thank you.